out of all the things that can trip people up, credit is just kind of one of those things that either it's good enough or it's not. Income can be one of those things that can seriously trip a lot of folks up, including those in the mortgage industry. And there's things that sometimes come in later in the loan process that can certainly cause some conflict and friction and more questions and things like that too. So I'm going to give you sort of an example of something that happened just fairly recent with some clients. And the good news is they're still closing. But something that came up, clients own their own business um, and get W-2 income. So most of you, would probably tend to think someone gets W-2 income. That's great. The taxes are getting paid and all that kind of stuff is happening. And it's honestly it's a whole lot easier for us to pre-approve somebody when someone's getting W-2 income because it's got W-2, you see their gross income, and that's what we go with. Well, they also do own their business. So it took a little bit to get their business tax returns. And then once we got the business tax returns, it took their CPA about 2.5 weeks to get us a balance sheet, which is something else when you're doing a conventional loan. A lot of times, the underwriter, well, not a lot of times, every time when you're doing a conventional loan, underwriters are going to ask for a balance sheet. Well, if the balance sheet, and it did in this case, it showed that what they have in the bank was only about 1/10 of the doables that needed to be paid. And that's not a good ratio. Okay. It means that you owe more, not just in like total debt, but like you owe more coming up in the month than what you actually currently have in the bank. And that what you have in the bank in their case was only about 1/10 of what they owed. Not a good scenario. So even though everything on the W-2 looked great, even though everything on like the business return actually looked okay, the balance sheet, something that we didn't even have until about 2 weeks into the process because it took a CPA a little time to get that to us, completely took that loan and made it unapprovable for a conventional loan. So we flipped it to FHA because FHA doesn't have, they're not really looking at the balance sheet, and FHA loan looks at some other things. But I'm using this as an example. There's sometimes things that you can't see until you have all of these pieces in play. And a lot of people don't think when they go to get a mortgage loan that they may need to provide a balance sheet on their business or a year to date profit and loss statement. You know, I remember years ago, there was a local company and the owner applied for a loan and he was making on his W-2 about 400,000 a year. Looked great. Okay. Looked really good. His business tax return, though, showed $1 million loss. Like things like that too. Sometimes a client will work on their pre-approval or their application online. They'll provide W-2s, pay stubs to support what income they entered for themselves. But then if you have a business that has $1 million loss, is it likely that this person that's making three or $400,000 a year, is it likely that income can continue if the business is losing money? These are questions that sometimes come up when people are going through the process. So, I want to touch on a few basics today that I just want you all to be kind of aware of. But I don't want to, like, this is part of our job too. So this isn't something that you need to make sure you're taking detailed notes and you need to make sure that this is how you're talking to all your, no, talking to the clients about their income and employment, all that stuff, that's our job. So, but I want to give you enough where you do understand if you have something come back and you're trying to figure out why is this coming up at this stage? Here's some reasons why. Okay. So, um, the biggest thing, just reiterate one thing I said, lenders are not looking at how much at just how much money your buyer makes. They're asking questions about every dollar of income on that application. So, like question number one, and this is a big one, is the money stable? So, like, has that income, has it been consistent over time, or does it bounce around? So, I've been doing this a long time, but I will tell you back in the early 2000s, so many business owners had QuickBooks on their computer, and so many business owners were committing fraud and creating paychecks and W2s that were not legit. Now, you don't see this a lot too much anymore, if ever, because there's protocols that lenders, Fannie Mae, Freddie, FHA, government have put in place to protect lenders from getting burned. But this was something that was happening a lot. So lenders, when we're looking at income, we're looking to see, number one, is it stable? Question number two, is it likely to continue? Like, is there a reasonable expectation? Just like on the one I gave you the sample of a second ago, great income, but if the company is losing money, is it really likely that income is going to continue? All right. Another example of that sometimes can be maybe a lady that's going through a divorce and she's getting child support, but one of her kids is 17. So we know most likely with the divorce decree at age 18, that income is going to stop. So it's not income that's likely to continue, right? Or sometimes people may apply, maybe they're getting temporary disability from a job injury. But if it's not permanent disability, that temporary disability, we may have to have something from a doctor or medical staff saying this disability is likely to continue for 3 years. But we're looking to see, is it stable? Is it likely to continue? Okay. And if there's questions regarding either one of those two questions, or, more questions regarding those two questions, it can be a challenge to get a loan approved or get the income approved. All right. So, with that said, I want to go through some different scenarios with you of and I'm gonna start with the easiest borrower for us to work on, and that's someone that's getting a base salary, like someone that just got a new job and their salary is 100 grand a year. It doesn't matter if they're working 36 hours a week or 50 hours a week. Their income is 100 grand a year. You can show it on a pay stub. You can get an offer letter from the employer saying 100 grand. That's simple. We just take that number, yearly number, divide it by 12. That's the income that we're given. And I'll just throw this out in case y'all don't know it. I think most of you probably do, but sometimes I do run into people not understanding this. A lender's using their gross income on a W 2, only on a W 2, not a tax return. And we'll talk about that more in a second. But if your base salary on a W 2, let's say is 100 grand, we're not using after tax dollars to qualify you. We're using 100 grand. So whatever the base salary is, all right, it's the easiest. Someone getting a base salary, we can get you pre-approved in a matter of a few minutes because it's super easy to calculate and figure. All right, here's the one that's not quite as easy, and that's an hourly wage buyer. All right, so it's kind of straightforward, but what a lender is going to do is we're going to average typically the last 2 years of earnings to determine qualifying income. So if people are working hourly wages, for the most part, most of the time when I see someone working hourly wage, they're working 36 to 40 hours a week. That seems typical. But there are jobs where we can see the hours range a lot. And if there's a big change in hours, maybe 1 week on a pay stub, they're showing 25 hours, the next week they're showing 37, that's a problem. We're not showing stable income, right? It doesn't mean it's not doable. It just means we're probably going to have to do a little bit more digging from the employer to see what the average number of hours are that person has worked for the last 2 years. Okay. So that's kind of what we're looking at with an hourly wage borrower. Here's sometimes the buyers that we have. They get an hourly wage. maybe they get a salary, but then in addition to that, maybe they get overtime, or maybe they get bonus, or maybe they get commission. So this is the part that can get a little squirrely. But if the buyers get anything regarding like overtime, we have to show over the last couple of years what they've averaged in the amount of overtime. So how do we do that? Because you're not going to see that number on a paycheck stub. So a lender is going to order what's called a verification of employment. They're going to have the employer fill this out over the last 2 years. And one of the questions is average amount of overtime, or how many overtime hours worked in the last 12 months. And then we can average it all out. Okay. But just because a person maybe starts working overtime this month, or sometimes we have buyers say this: I just took a part-time job. That's great, but unless you have a history of working overtime, unless you have a history of having a part-time job in addition to a full-time job for 2 years, it can be very difficult to use all of that income. Okay. So again, we're looking for what's stable, what is likely to continue. If a person just started working a part time job, maybe they will continue it, but they don't have a track record established yet of doing that. So it's hard to say it's going to continue. It's hard to say it's stable since they just started. Okay, so when they have overtime, we're looking for a history. When they have bonuses, we're looking that they've had a history of receiving a bonus. And if they have a part-time job, we're looking for some history that they've been able to maintain two jobs at the same time for the last couple of years. Does that all kind of make sense? All right. So here's one thing that is positive and good news for a lot of people, because I see a lot of people don't know this part. What if a buyer is going to accept a new job? All right. Here's something a lot of folks don't know. If we have a job offer letter that states the buyer will begin employment within 90 days, we can use that income and allow them to go ahead and close on the new home. Now, there's a couple of gotchas with that, right? One is it's got to be a clean employment offer, meaning if it says contingent on background checks, contingent on drug testing, anything can, there can't be any contingencies with it. Okay. So what I will say that we see more often than not, we see a lot of people moving into the area specifically with Carillion. And Carillion, great employer, but sometimes they're not the easiest to work with to get contingencies cleared. Okay. It doesn't mean they won't. We've worked with them a lot over the years to get them cleared, but sometimes they're not the easiest. Okay. But we can work with a person getting a new job if they're getting guaranteed hours at a certain rate or guaranteed salary. We can use that as long as they start within 90 days of closing and as long as there's no contingencies on the job offer. Okay. I think there was a question. I'm going to pop that open real quick. Requirement that it be the same or similar field of employment. Yes, typically yes. Now, the other thing that we do see a lot of times too, and I'll go ahead and cover this now because I think it's important, is, and we've had this happen just recently. Kids graduate college in May and they get a job offer letter. That college degree counts as employment history. Okay. So as long as we can show, hey, I was studying nursing in college, graduated from Radford in May, and now I have an employment offer letter with Lewis Gale starting in September, we can use that income and we can show that, so as long as it's all related. But years ago, one of the nightmare stories, I mean, anytime we start a new loan, Ellison is really super good about sending our clients something called the 10 Commandments, things not to do, which one of those is, guess what? Don't change jobs. Okay. I have a client closing on Monday that pulled this trick. Um, here recently. So she's still closing, but it things almost got a little squirrely with her. All right. But I'll never forget years ago, I had a school teacher, that's stable income. School teachers, very stable income. Their income is what their income is. Doesn't matter how many hours a week they're working as a school teacher, their income is their income. Decided it would be a good idea during the loan process to start selling cars. That doesn't fly, especially when it's 100% commission on selling cars. That does not work, right? So, and they were shocked that that a lender wouldn't be happy with this. Um, now, the odds of them making more money selling cars than a school teacher, probably pretty good, but we have no stability. We have no likelihood of continued employment. What if they fail doing it? So anyways, but a new buyer, as long as it's related type field or coming out of college and there's an offer letter within 90 days, it's good. Now, something else lenders sometimes see that can cause problems is when there is a gap of employment. Okay, so if it's a short gap, because we're looking for the last 2 years of employment history, if there's a gap in there of like a month, we can probably explain it, have the client explain it, and be okay. But let's say there's a 6 month gap, and we had this not too long ago either. We still close, but the borrower had to provide a very, very detailed explanation of what created the 6 month gap. And he had had a very serious health issue that put him in the hospital. So we had documentation, but it's got to be something substantial to show that this is not the person's character or who they are. It's not like them to just be out and not working for 6 months, basically. So again, goes back to stability. So just because there's a gap doesn't mean it can't happen, but we might need to go to the drawing board and help the borrower come up with some good explanations. Okay. So the biggest thing that I feel catches people off guard more than anything else is the self-employed buyer, realtors. It's people working like you guys, right? And obviously, anybody that is self-employed, what do you want to do when it comes to paying taxes? Pay as little as possible, right? So I'm in full agreement. That's what everybody wants to do. And I want to pay as little taxes as I possibly can too. So here's the thing, and it is different with a self employed borrower. I mentioned before when someone's making, let's say, a salary of 100 grand a year, the lender is using their gross figure. So the figure before taxes come out. Self employed, no. We have to use the net figure. So if you do, a lot of self-employed people will file something called a Schedule C, which shows your gross receipts minus all of your expenses that you're going to write off so you can pay less in taxes. But whatever that net income is, that's pretty much the number that we're looking at to get someone pre-approved. Now, there are a few other things that can be added back in, like depreciation, we can add back in, but we're looking at the most recent 2 year tax record history. Now, here's a couple of other things a lot of people don't know either. Let's say you had a great 2024, but 2025 was down in income. A lender will not average the last 2 years. The lender, since 2025 is the most recent year of income, that's what we have to use to figure your income. We throw 2024 out and we just look at the worst case because your income is declining. So if your 2025 income is about the same or more, then a lender will average out the last 2 years. Something else that a lot of times we see, I know I've talked about commission income, I've talked about part-time income, rental income. We had a borrower last week, I think on his return, he had a Schedule E and he owned 8 rental properties. Okay. So what can a lender count and what can we not count? So if you Let's say you have property 123 Main Street, you rent it out for 2,000 a month, your mortgage on it is 1,500. It seems like common sense would say lender can give you $500 of income on that. You got a mortgage of 15, you rent it for 2, it sounds like you're to the good of 500. But not so fast. If your Schedule E shows that you have a loss on that property, that's what we have to go with. Okay. So again, it's everything, whatever is being reported to the IRS is what a lender has to go with. Now, let me give you a positive spin on this. That's also a very positive thing in the industry. We had, I love it when we have clients like this, but we had clients close last week, bought their first home, very first home, $300,000 duplex. First time home buyers bought their first home, $300,000 duplex. They have a tenant on one side, they're going to live in the other side. Because there is no past history or rental income, here's what a lender can do. We can count their 12-month lease they have for their tenants on the other side, and we can give them credit for 75% of whatever their 12-month lease is with that tenant. Okay? So that helped them get approved for a $300,000 duplex. Now it's about three-fourths of their mortgage payment is being paid by the other tenant. I mean, it is the smartest thing a first-time home buyer, how they could ever purchase a home is immediately becoming a real estate investor. I love it. So if you find someone that is buying maybe a duplex like that, we can give them credit for 75% of what the other unit is being rented for. Or let's say this, maybe you've got a past client that's thinking now about buying rental property or investment property and start building a real estate portfolio. If they've never done it before on the home that they're purchasing, as long as there's a 12-month lease in place, we can give them 75% credit of what the lease is in place for. Okay? It's only when they've already become a homeowner or already own investment property that we have to use what's on a Schedule E. But if they have no history of it, we can use 75% of what their monthly lease is. Okay? So I think that's a little interesting. I get a lot of people don't know. Here's something else. Let's say maybe that you have an older couple, let's say about Ellison's age, that is, um, I was just seeing if you were paying attention. That's all. And apparently you are. Okay. So, um, but let's say you have an older couple and they're earning Social Security. A lot of people don't know this, but if that couple does not pay taxes, a lender can actually gross up their income 125%. So a lot of times we can give a retired couple that's earning Social Security income a higher income on paper than what they're actually getting since it's not taxable income. Okay. So again, some lenders don't know that either. Most do, but some don't. Okay. We talked about child support, alimony. Those are two things that sometimes can get you. But let's make this, we've got about 3 minutes left. I want to make this really practical and give you some questions that you can ask people if you want to just do a little bit of digging on the front end when you're talking to somebody. Question one, are you employed full-time, part-time, self-employed, or retired? That can be a great question that can at least kind of get you thinking toward what you may be dealing with. Question two, have you been in this job or field for the last 2 years? This kind of shows you if there's a red flag, if they tell you no. Question three, does any part of your income come from overtime, bonuses, or commissions? Question four, if you're self-employed, have you filed your last 2 years of tax returns? And roughly where does that income, net income show? Now, here's something else. I'll just put this out here too, because it just dawned on me. But sometimes we get a buyer like this. They're moving from state to Virginia, from another state to Virginia, and let's say they're a builder. Okay. Well, we just had this not too long ago. We had a photographer that was moving from another state to the Roanoke area, self-employed photographer. What would be a lender's concern about a self-employed photographer moving from one state to another state?
Clientele.
Yeah, like completely starting over a brand new business. So you're talking about the first thing I said a lot of times that a lender is going to look at stability. That's not stable income. I've been in a different market building a business for the last 20 years and now moving to a different market. My income is probably going to change, right? So, question four. No, I already gave you question four. Question five. Have you had any gaps in employment or significant income changes in the last 2 years? So, again, I'm not giving you those things to deny somebody. Leave that up to a lender to do. I'm just giving you some things that might throw up a red flag and something you might want to ask us about. But anyhow, I've got agents too that refer us business that don't ask any income questions. They just put it on us. But that's perfectly fine too. But I also want to give you some things that sometimes, just like the one I mentioned, we do have closing tomorrow, but it started as a conventional loan and we had to pivot and do something different. So a lot of times it doesn't mean that you can't do the loan, but I did have to explain to both the realtors why we're moving from conventional to FHA, because that's usually not something a realtor wants to hear, right? Um, However, it's a whole lot better than moving from conventional to no loan at all. And so everything actually worked out just great with these folks, but sometimes that can help or that can happen. Okay. Um, Mitch asks, as long as the gap is explainable, are we good? Typically, yes. It just needs to make sense. Okay. But if you've got somebody that, you're looking at a 2 year employment history, which really isn't a long period of time in the scheme of things, and in a 2 year employment history, they have four jobs and 2 months they didn't work, well, that may be hard to explain. Okay. I think it's just one of those things that a underwriter is looking at, see, is this a person that we can look at and tell, for the most part, they have great work history, work ethic, but this happened to them medically, or maybe they had a baby or whatever happened that would cause a gap.
Also, really quick, current time on their job now plays a factor. So if the gap is in history, but they've been on their current job now for 6 months or more, a lot of times they're showing the stability in their current employment window. So they'll look at that too. Just throwing that out
Yeah.
there.
Okay. Thank you, Dixie. All right. That pretty much covers a lot of the income things that we typically look at and also what causes some heartburn along the way. Any other questions on income piece? No? So next week we're talking about assets and how much you typically need to have. And also we'll touch some too on like down payment assistant type programs because there are programs that are out there that help people cover some of the assets. So you don't always need them, but what do lenders typically look at? Credit, collateral, assets, and income. Those are the three biggies. So we'll talk more about that next week. Really want to get as many people as we can here for 2 weeks because we're going to talk about some out of the box things that don't really match up with like the conforming um, cookie cutter items that a lot of people are used to that we do have access to. So we'll talk more about that in 2 weeks. But hope you guys have an amazing 4th of July weekend, and we'll see you next week. Thank you for being here.